Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Let's get comfy and relaxed and let's begin. Story 1. The night was black as ink, and the rain came down in thick sheets, hammering the windshield like a million tiny fists. The wipers could barely keep up, smearing water across the glass instead of clearing it. I was on a long, empty stretch of highway, a delivery run to a town so small it barely existed. Just a post office, a gas station, and a handful of houses. The kind of place where secrets sank into the earth like blood. The highway was deserted. No headlights in the distance, no taillights ahead. Just me, the rain, and the monotonous hum of the tires on wet asphalt. I was already exhausted. My eyelids felt heavy, and my thoughts blurred together. The only thing keeping me alert was the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. And then I saw it, a flicker of movement in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, maybe a shadow shifting with the motion of the car. But then it happened again, subtle, like someone adjusting in their seat. But there was no one there. My stomach tightened. I told myself I was tired. I told myself it was just the rain, the flickering streetlights. I told myself a lot of things. But then I heard it. A whisper. Low. Close. Just behind my right ear. Keep driving. Don't look back. I sucked in a sharp breath, my hands locking onto the wheel. I nearly slammed on the brakes, but didn't. Some deep, primal instinct told me to listen. The voice had been so clear, so precise. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rain. It was a voice, a whisper. I swallowed hard and forced my eyes to stay on the road. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest, beating so hard I thought it might shake the car apart. Every nerve in my body screamed to check the mirror, to glance over my shoulder, to make sure I was still alone. But I didn't. The whisper came again, softer this time, amused. Good choice. A shiver crawled down my spine like an icy hand. The presence, whatever it was, seemed to settle. The air in the car shifted, like someone had leaned back and made themselves comfortable. The rain roared on, and the highway stretched ahead, an endless ribbon of darkness. I kept driving. I didn't dare speak. I didn't dare breathe too loudly. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen, but undeniably there. My eyes burned from staring too hard at the road, but I refused to blink too long. I refused to close my eyes. If I did, I was afraid I'd see something waiting for me when I opened them again. After what felt like an eternity, the exit for the town appeared, a glowing green sign standing out against the night. I flicked my blinker on and eased the car off the highway, my fingers numb around the steering wheel. I kept telling myself I was fine, that nothing had happened, that I was just tired and imagining things. But as I pulled into the gas station on the edge of town, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The seatbelt in the back seat was buckled. I stared at it, my breath hitching, my hands clenched and unclenched against the wheel. I hadn't buckled it. No one had been back there. I left the car running and stepped out, gulping in the cold, rain-soaked air. I needed to be out of that car. I needed to put space between myself and whatever had been in there with me. I walked inside the gas station, the fluorescent lights making my eyes ache. The old man behind the counter looked up, giving me a once-over. "You okay, son?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't look convinced. He glanced past me, out into the lot where my car idled in the rain. His expression darkened slightly. "You come down Route 17? I hesitated. "Yeah, what?" He exhaled through his nose and shook his head. "Damn fool. You ain't local, huh?" "No." He leaned against the counter, eyeing me carefully. "Ain't the first time someone's come in here looking like they've seen a ghost. That road's got history. Bad history." I swallowed, my throat dry. "What kind of history?" The old man tapped his fingers on the counter, considering his words. "There was a wreck out there, about 20 years ago. Young woman, driving alone at night. Went off the road in the rain. They didn't find her for 3 days." He scratched his jaw. "Folks say she never left." I stared at him, my skin crawling. I didn't want to believe him, but deep down, I already knew. When I got back in the car, the seatbelt was unbuckled. Story 2. I've never been the kind of person who gets spooked easily. I don't jump at shadows. I don't sleep with the lights on. But this was different. It started on a Thursday night, or technically Friday morning, 3 a.m., that dead, heavy hour when the world is supposed to be quiet. I was half asleep when my phone rang, the vibration rattling against my nightstand. I groggily reached for it, my eyes squinting against the glow of the screen. No caller ID. That should have been my first warning. But I was too tired to think. Maybe a wrong number. Maybe some automated spam call. So I answered. Silence. No static. No breathing. Nothing. "Hello." I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. No reply. I hung up and rolled onto my side, barely processing it before slipping back into a haze. But then, the phone rang again. Same number. No caller ID. I hesitated. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine, but I answered anyway. Again, silence. Not normal silence, though. It wasn't the dead air of a dropped call or bad reception. It was like something was there, just listening. I hung up faster this time, a little more awake now, my heart drumming against my ribs. I placed the phone face down on my nightstand and tried to shake it off. A prank, I told myself. Some idiot messing around. It wasn't a big deal. I was about to drift off when... Ring. I jolted upright, staring at the glowing screen. No caller ID. My hands felt clammy. My room, which had been warm and comfortable a few minutes ago, suddenly felt too cold. This time, I didn't answer. I let it ring. The sound buzzed in the quiet darkness, filling the space with something heavy, something wrong. After what felt like forever, it stopped. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. It was nothing, just a stupid prank. I rolled over, pulling the blanket tighter around me. My body was still tense, every nerve wound tight, but eventually, exhaustion won. When I woke up the next morning, I remembered the calls immediately. I grabbed my phone, my fingers moving fast, opening my call log. And then I froze. There was nothing there. No missed calls. No incoming calls. No record that my phone had rung even once during the night. I swallowed hard. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I'd been half dreaming. But then I saw the text. One new message. No number. No contact name. Just a blank space where a number should be. I clicked on it. The message was short. "I know you're awake. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, feeling like something was watching me. The air in my bedroom was thick, pressing against my skin like damp cloth. My first instinct was to delete the text, pretend it didn't happen, but some sick part of me needed to know. I replied, "Who is this?" No response. I waited, staring at the screen until my vision blurred. Nothing. An hour passed, then two. Eventually, I convinced myself it was some glitch or scam, some weird tech thing. But that night, at exactly 3 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, I didn't even reach for it. I just sat there, stiff in bed, my breathing shallow. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped. I lay awake until dawn, my skin crawling, every creak in my apartment making me flinch. The next night, it happened again, and the next, always at 3 a.m., always with no caller ID, always with silence. By the end of the week, I stopped answering completely, but the text continued. "Pick up. I know you can hear me. Let me in. Let me in." That one made me nauseous. I stopped sleeping. My appetite vanished. I felt watched, like there were eyes just behind me, just outside my vision, waiting. By the second week, I was done. I packed a bag, found a new place across town, and left. No forwarding address. No explanations. I got out. The first night in my new apartment was the best sleep I'd had in weeks. No calls. No texts. Just silence. But then, the second night, 3 a.m., my phone vibrated on the nightstand. No caller ID. I turned it over, my breath hitching in my throat. A single message appeared on the screen. "Found you. Story 3. I should have never said yes. It was just babysitting." One night, my sister, Claire, had a last-minute shift at the hospital, and her usual sitter had canceled. "Please, Josh," she had begged over the phone. "He's already asleep. You won't have to do anything. Just keep an eye on the monitor." I hesitated, but eventually I agreed. It was just a baby. My nephew, Noah, barely 10 months old. He wouldn't give me any trouble. I arrived at Claire's house around 9:30 p.m. She gave me the usual run-through. Bottles in the fridge, emergency numbers on the counter. Don't open the back door because the lock was finicky. She kissed Noah on the forehead before heading out. And then it was just me. The house was eerily silent, except for the faint hum of the baby monitor sitting on the coffee table. I could see Noah's crib on the screen, his tiny body curled up in his blanket, sleeping soundly. I settled onto the couch, flipping through channels, occasionally glancing at the monitor. Everything was fine, until midnight. I don't know what made me look. Maybe some primal instinct, some ancient part of my brain whispering that something was wrong. My eyes flicked to the baby monitor, and at first, everything seemed normal. Noah was still asleep, his little chest rising and falling in the grainy black and white feed. Then I saw it, a hand. It was resting on the crib railing. My body went cold. It wasn't Noah's. His hands were tucked under the blanket, barely visible. But this hand, it was long, pale, too thin. The fingers stretched over the railing like spider legs. I blinked. It didn't move. For a second, I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe it was a shadow, some trick of the shitty old baby monitor. Then the fingers twitched. I bolted. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I hit the hallway, shoved open the nursery door, and nothing. The room was empty. Noah was still sleeping. The crib was exactly as it should be. No open windows. No signs of an intruder. I stood there, panting, feeling like an idiot. But I had seen it. I knew I had seen it. Swallowing hard, I walked over to the crib and ran my hand over the railing. Smooth. No marks. No smudges. I even checked under the crib, half expecting to find some lurking presence, but there was nothing. I was losing it. That's what I told myself. Just sleep deprivation. Maybe some leftover childhood fear clawing its way back up. I needed to calm down. I went back downstairs, forced myself onto the couch, and took a deep breath. The monitor still sat on the table, screen glowing. I looked. The hand was gone, but something was different. I squinted, leaning in closer. The angle hadn't changed, but something about the crib railing looked off. Then I saw them. Claw marks. Deep, jagged gouges, right where the hand had been. The breath left my lungs. My stomach turned to ice. Noah stirred in his crib, his tiny body shifting in the blanket. I watched, frozen, as he let out a soft coo, and then the monitor flickered. For half a second, the static distorted the image, just a brief burst of interference. But in that half second, I saw something. A face, a pale face peering over the edge of the crib. Hollow eyes, no lips, just a smooth, stretched grin. The screen went back to normal, and Noah began to cry. I didn't go back upstairs. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached, staring at the monitor, waiting for whatever was up there to show itself again. But it didn't. At 4 a.m., Claire came home. She found me sitting on the couch, pale, shaking, my eyes glued to the baby monitor. She frowned. "Josh, what's wrong?" I pointed at the monitor. "Did Noah wake up at all?" She shook her head, puzzled. "No, he sleeps through the night." I swallowed hard. "Check his crib." Claire gave me a look but went upstairs. A moment later, she called down. "Why are there scratches on the crib?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I left without explaining, and Claire didn't ask. I haven't been back to that house since, and I sure as hell will never babysit again. Story 4. When I first moved into the apartment, the landlord barely looked at me as he handed over the keys. He was an older guy, wiry and hunched, with the permanent scowl of someone who'd seen too much. "That last room at the end of the hall," he said, not meeting my eyes. "It's locked. Always been locked. No key. Just keep it shut." It was such a strange thing to say, but I was too exhausted from moving to question it. I just nodded, took the keys, and that was that. The apartment itself was nothing special. Small, a little dingy, but cheap. The kind of place where the floor creaked like it was whispering secrets beneath your feet, where the plumbing made noises at night, like something was crawling through the pipes. But I didn't care. It was mine, and after years of crashing on couches and scraping by, that meant something. Still, the room at the end of the hall unsettled me. The door was an old wooden thing, warped and cracked at the edges. It had a rusted keyhole that looked like a blind, staring eye. I told myself I didn't care. It was just a locked door. Probably a utility closet or some storage space the landlord forgot about. But then, the noises started. At first, they were small. A faint creak, like footsteps shifting on old wood. A tap, a soft scratch, Scratch, scratch. I ignored it. Old buildings make noise. It's what they do. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became. One night, I woke up to a sound that made my skin crawl. Bang, like something had slammed against a locked door. Hard. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering. My room was dark except for the weak glow of the street lamp outside, casting long, skeletal shadows across the walls. I strained my ears, waiting. Nothing. Just silence. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe it was the pipes again. Then I smelled it. Rot. Thick. Cloying, like old wood left to fester in the damp. Like something dead had been sealed away for years. And now it was waking up. I swung my legs over the bed and stood, every instinct screaming at me to stay put. But I had to see. I had to know. The hallway stretched out in front of me. Too long, too dark. The air was stale, heavy with something unseen. I took slow steps forward, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I saw it, the door, the one that had always been locked. Wide, open, my breath caught in my chest. The room beyond was pitch black, an open mouth swallowing the light from the hallway. The smell was worse now, thick and wet, like mold growing in something decayed. I didn't want to go closer, but my feet carried me forward, drawn by a horrible, morbid curiosity. I didn't cross the threshold. I didn't have to, because just inside, scratched into the floorboards, was a single word. Run. The marks were deep, jagged, fresh. I didn't wait. I turned and bolted, my pulse a roaring drumbeat in my ears. I grabbed my jacket, my wallet, my keys. I didn't even stop to put on shoes. I just ran out of that apartment and into the cold night, breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I never went back. A week later, I got a call from the landlord. He was annoyed, asking why I'd left so suddenly. I told him about the noises, about the door, about the word carved into the floor. There was a long silence on the other end. Then he sighed. Yeah, he said, voice flat. That happens sometimes. Like it was nothing. Like it was just some minor inconvenience. What do you mean, that happens? I snapped. Another pause. Then, softer. You're lucky it let you leave. I hung up, blocked his number, found a new place across town. Sometimes, late at night, I dream about that apartment. The way the hall stretched longer than it should have. The way the door stood open, waiting. The way the darkness inside seemed to pulse, hungry. And I wake up with the smell of rot in my nose, like something is still trying to find me. Story 5. It started with a smile. A wrong one. I was brushing my teeth, my head full of nothing, just another night in my quiet little apartment. The tap dripped, the fluorescent light hummed, and I scrubbed away, watching myself in a mirror the way we all do, without really looking. Until I did, and I saw it. I wasn't smiling, but my reflection was. Not a big, exaggerated grin, just a small, knowing smile. The kind people give when they have a secret. The toothbrush slipped from my fingers, clattering into the sink. My throat tightened. The air in the bathroom felt thick, like something was pressing down on me. I swallowed, blinked hard, then forced myself to look again. The smile was still there. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe my face had twitched. Maybe the steam from the shower was playing with the glass. I raised a hand, slowly, willing my reflection to do the same. It did, at first. Then it kept going. I had stopped moving, but my reflection hadn't. It lifted its hand, fingers curling into a slow, deliberate wave. That was when I ran. I didn't turn off the light. I didn't even glance back. I just bolted, my feet slipping on a hallway rug, heart slamming in my chest. I reached my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and pressed my back against it, sucking in sharp, ragged breaths. For a long time, I just stood there, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No whisper of movement. Just the soft ticking of the clock on my wall and the distant hum of cars outside. The rational part of my brain, the part that still believed in logic, told me I was being ridiculous. Mirrors don't move on their own. Reflections don't smile when you don't. I hesitated for what felt like hours before I worked up the nerve to go back. The bathroom light was still on, casting a long, eerie rectangle of light into the hall. I stepped forward, muscles tense, every inch of me screaming to run the other way. The mirror was cracked. A long, jagged fracture ran down the center of the glass, splitting my reflection in two. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the handprint, pressed against the inside of the glass. Story 6. I went into the woods alone. The way I saw it, it was just another ordinary evening. The air was crisp, the sky burning orange, and the forest stretched out in front of me, a quiet, endless expanse. I liked hiking solo. Something about the isolation, the sheer disconnect from everything. No emails, no buzzing phone, just the sound of my boots on the dirt trail, the distant call of a bird, and the occasional rustle of unseen things in the underbrush. I wasn't worried about the time, not at first, but as I made my way back toward my car, I instinctively checked my watch. 6:23 p.m. The sun was lowering faster than I'd expected. I picked up my pace, crunching through dried leaves, my breath curling in the cooling air. Then I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, I was somewhere else. The trail was gone. The trees were taller here, old and gnarled, their bark cracked like the skin of something ancient. The air felt heavier, thick with the scent of wet earth, like it had rained, but my clothes were dry. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent pain behind my eyes. I swallowed hard and checked my watch. 3:12 a.m. My stomach dropped. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the unfamiliar clearing. The ground was soft beneath my boots, damp, like I was standing in a place where water should have been. Moonlight barely trickled through the dense canopy above, and the world around me was eerily silent. No crickets, no rustling, no wind. I took a shaky breath and looked down. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They surrounded me in a rough, uneven circle, pressed deep into the mud. My own tracks weren't there. No sign of where I'd walked in. But these, they were fresh, and they weren't mine. I felt it then. That slow, creeping awareness that I wasn't alone. A branch snapped behind me. I spun so fast I nearly lost my footing. My flashlight was still clipped to my belt, and with shaking hands, I flicked it on. A weak, yellow beam cut through the darkness. The trees loomed, their trunks twisted, their limbs reaching toward me like skeletal fingers. I took a step forward, then froze. Something had moved. Not a rabbit, not a deer. Something else. The shadows shifted between the trees, deep where my flashlight couldn't reach. A shape, a figure, maybe just beyond the edges of my vision. I strained to see, my pulse hammering in my throat. Another step, a deliberate one. Closer this time. I backed up, forcing my breath to stay even, my fingers gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. My brain was scrambling, trying to make sense of it. Had I been drugged? Had I fallen? Lost consciousness? The rational part of me clung to those ideas, but the rest of me, the primal, terrified part, knew better. I licked my dry lips and tried to call out, but my voice cracked. Another step. Closer. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. I didn't care about being quiet. My boots slammed against the wet earth, breath tearing from my lungs. The flashlight beam bounced wildly, catching glimpses of trees, twisted roots, something pale. Was at a hand. Before I forced myself to stop looking, I ran until my chest burned, until my legs screamed, and then I saw it. A road. Not the parking lot where I'd left my car, but a road. Faint headlights glowed in the distance. I stumbled onto the pavement, waving my arms frantically, and a truck swerved to a stop. The driver, an older man with sun-leathered skin, rolled down the window, eyes wide. "Jesus, son, you all right?" I could barely speak. Lost, I choked out. I was in the woods. I don't know how I got here. The man frowned, glancing past me at the dark tree lane. "Inner trail's out this way," he said slowly. "Nothing but old land. Been empty for years." I tried to explain, but my voice shook too much. He nodded toward the truck. "Come on, I'll get you somewhere safe." I hesitated, glancing back. The forest was still, silent, but deep in the shadows, something moved. I got in the truck. I never found my car. Never figured out what happened in those missing hours. And sometimes in the dead of night, I wake up gasping, my body covered in mud, footprints on my bedroom floor. And they still aren't mine. Story 7. I used to see him every morning, standing by his mailbox, dressed in the same faded flannel shirt and khaki pants. His name was Mr. Halloran. He had the look of a man who'd seen too much of the world. Thin shoulders, sunken eyes, and the kind of stiff posture that suggested his bones ached more than he let on. Every morning, he'd give me a polite nod as I backed out of my driveway. Some mornings, he'd raise a hand in a slow, measured wave, his eyes shaded by the brim of his old baseball cap. I'd wave back. It was just something we did. I never thought much about him. He was part of the scenery, like the leaning oak tree in his front yard or the cracked pavement leading up to his porch. A fixture of the neighborhood. Until the morning he didn't wave. I noticed it right away. It was early, the sun still rising, and there he was, standing by his mailbox, his cap pulled low over his face. But he wasn't moving. He wasn't checking his mail. He wasn't shifting from foot to foot the way he sometimes did when the morning air was cold. He was just staring at me. It wasn't the kind of blank, absent-minded stare that old folks sometimes get. It was different, intentional. His head was tilted slightly forward, his eyes locked onto mine, his mouth pressed into a tight, thin line. I slowed my car, hesitated. Then the light changed on the corner, and I had to move. At work, I couldn't shake the feeling. The way he had looked at me, there was something not right about it. something that made the air in my chest feel heavier than usual. When I got home that evening, I told my wife, Laura, about it. She frowned, flipping a page in the book she was pretending to read. "Who? Mr. Halloran," I said. "You know, the old guy next door." She stopped reading. "Honey," she said carefully, setting the book aside, "that house has been empty for years." I let out a short laugh. "Come on. He was standing right there this morning." She shook her head. "No one lives there." I stared at her. "No," I said. "I see him every morning. He waves at me. We've lived here 3 years. You're telling me you've never seen him?" She shrugged. "I don't know what to tell you, but that place has been empty a long time." I frowned. That doesn't make any sense. But the thing was, Laura wasn't the type to joke about things like this. She wasn't the type to joke at all, really. That night, after she fell asleep, I pulled out my laptop. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but my fingers worked on their own, typing our neighborhood's name into a search bar. It didn't take long to find. Mr. Halloran had lived in that house, but he had died 10 years ago. Car accident, right on the highway outside of town. They found his truck wrapped around a telephone pole, his body thrown 20 feet from the wreck. I stared at the screen for a long time, my mouth dry. No, that couldn't be right. I had seen him, hadn't I? My hands were shaking as I shut the laptop. I crawled back into bed, pressing against Laura's warmth, and told myself I'd imagined everything. The next morning, something was on my porch. A newspaper. Old. Yellowed. The edges curled like dried leaves. I bent down and picked it up. The print was faded, but I could still read the date. Exactly 10 years ago, the day Mr. Halloran had died. My stomach turned to ice. My hands trembled. I flipped through the pages, heart hammering, and there, on the 3rd page, was the accident report. Local man killed in fatal crash. His picture was beside it. Same flannel shirt, same khaki pants, same unreadable expression. I dropped the paper and backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet. I spun around, eyes darting to his house. The mailbox was empty, and there was no one standing beside it. That was 3 months ago. I don't see him anymore. But sometimes, when I leave for work in the mornings, I feel it. That same heavy, watching presence. And sometimes, when I look in the rearview mirror as I drive away, I think I see the outline of a man standing in the distance. Not waving, just staring. Story 8. I was home alone that night, stretched out on the couch, flipping through channels like a zombie. The house was quiet, save for the low murmur of the TV. It had been a long week, and the plan was simple. Relax, maybe fall asleep right there with the remote still in my hand. But then I heard it, the front door unlocking. At first, I thought I imagined it. Maybe the wind rattled the handle. Maybe the metal parts inside the lock just settled. But then came the soft, unmistakable click of the door easing open. I froze. The air inside the house suddenly felt heavier, colder. My heartbeat picked up speed, hammering in my chest. Every part of me screamed to move, to do something. But for those first few seconds, I just sat there, staring at the dark hallway that led to the entrance. Then, the slow creak of the door, swinging open, snapped me into action. I grabbed the wooden bat I kept beside the couch, something I bought years ago when a string of break-ins happened around the neighborhood. My hands clenched around the handle, so tight my knuckles went white. I forced myself to stand, inching toward the hallway. Each step was slow, deliberate. My breathing was shallow, controlled. Every horror movie I'd ever seen screamed at me not to go toward the sound, but this was my house. I had to. As I turned the corner, the sight made my stomach drop. The front door was wide open. Outside, the street was empty. The porch light flickered, casting long shadows on the wet pavement. The wind howled softly, making the trees sway. But there was no one there. I swallowed hard, stepping closer to the doorway. The night air smelled damp, a fresh reminder that rain had passed earlier. I leaned out just enough to look both ways down the street. Nothing. I stepped back inside quickly, shutting the door and twisting the deadbolt with trembling fingers. I even flipped the extra latch on top, something I hadn't used in years. Someone was here. Someone unlocked my door. The thought crawled up my spine like an insect. I checked every room. The kitchen, the bathroom, the guest bedroom, even the damn closet in the hallway. I was thorough. No one was inside. By the time I got back to the living room, I had almost convinced myself that I imagined it. Maybe I forgot to lock the door earlier. Maybe the wind. My phone buzzed. The sound nearly stopped my heart. I turned slowly, pulse thundering in my ears. My phone lay on the couch where I had left it. The screen was glowing. A text message. Unknown number. I swallowed, hesitating before picking it up. My thumb hovered over the screen. The message preview was short, only 4 words. You locked me in. A chill spread through my entire body. I read it again. You locked me in. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, to get the hell out of the house. But where would I go? And who had sent that? I looked around, suddenly feeling watched. The house was dead silent. No TV, no hum of the fridge. Just my own breathing, sharp and uneven. I checked the message details. No call history, no name, no response when I texted back. Just a black hole of nothing. I forced myself to think logically. Maybe a prank, maybe a glitch. But then I noticed something. The front door, the extra latch I had locked. It was undone. I never heard it unlatch. My stomach dropped. My hands went ice cold. Someone had been inside. Someone was still inside. I moved before my brain could catch up, gripping the bat like my life depended on it. I checked every hiding place again, faster this time. The coat closet, under the bed, the pantry, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. But that didn't make me feel any better. I went back to the living room, grabbing my keys off the table. I didn't care if it was paranoia or if I was overreacting. I was leaving. But before I could reach the door, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Don't leave. I'm not finished yet. My breath hitched. My hands trembled so badly, I almost dropped the phone. I forced myself to move, yanking open the door and stepping out onto the porch. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I didn't stop. I ran straight to my car, fumbling with the keys, nearly dropping them before I got the door unlocked. I locked the car doors, hands shaking as I started the engine. My chest felt tight, panic curling around my ribs like a vice. As I pulled away from the house, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My living room window was open, and standing in the darkness just behind the glass was a silhouette, watching me leave. I drove. I didn't stop until I reached a friend's house across town. I never went back to that house alone again. Story 9. I was 13 the first time I saw it. Our house sat on the edge of a dense forest, the kind that seemed to swallow the sun whole once dusk settled. My parents had bought the place cheap, too cheap, if you ask me now. It was old, drafty, with a basement that always smelled like wet earth no matter how many dehumidifiers we ran. The window down there faced the backyard, a narrow pane of glass just high enough to let in a sliver of daylight during the afternoon. At night, though, it was just a square of pure, impenetrable blackness. I hated the basement. It wasn't just the way the wooden steps creaked underfoot, or how the washing machine rattled like it was trying to shake itself apart. It was the feeling, a sense that I wasn't alone down there, even when I knew I was. I used to tell my mom that I felt like someone was watching me. She'd laugh and ruffle my hair, telling me I had an overactive imagination. My dad, on the other hand, wasn't much for nonsense. He told me, plain and simple, that there was nothing down there but spiders and a bunch of old junk. That night, I learned he was wrong. It was late, maybe just past 10, when my mom told me to switch the laundry over before bed. I remember groaning, dragging my feet toward the basement door. The light bulb at the top of the stairs flickered when I pulled the chain, barely pushing back the heavy dark below. Each step creaked louder than the last as I made my way down, the air turning colder the further I went. I kept my head down as I tossed the wet clothes into the dryer, hurrying through it so I could get the hell out of there. The faster, the better. But as I slammed the dryer door shut, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. The sound was soft, deliberate, like the tip of a fingernail against glass. I swallowed hard and turned toward the basement window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. The way the darkness outside pressed against the window, forming shadows, shifting with the sway of the trees. But then my stomach dropped. There was a face, pale, hollow-eyed, pressed against the glass. I sucked in a breath so sharp it hurt. The eyes, God, the eyes, were locked onto mine, unblinking. The skin stretched too tight over its skull, its mouth slightly open, like it had been caught mid-whisper. A shape moved in the darkness behind it, something shifting, something watching. I did the only thing my body would let me do. I ran. I bolted up the stairs, my feet barely hitting the steps, heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I burst into the living room, breathless, shouting for my parents. My dad was the first to react. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept near the door and rushed outside, my mom right behind him. I stayed inside, gripping the arm of the couch, so tight my nails dug into the fabric. They were only out there for a few minutes. But when my dad came back in, his face was pale. He didn't say anything. He just locked the door, slid the deadbolt into place, and exchanged a glance with my mom. I found out why the next morning. Muddy footprints, leading from the woods, right up to the basement window. My dad checked the yard, but there were no prints leading away. That was the last time I ever did laundry at night. Story 10. I worked the night shift at the Rosewood Inn, a creaky, aging hotel off Highway 17. It's the kind of place that looks dignified in daylight, but turns eerie once the sun goes down. The wallpaper is peeling in the corners. The floors groan under your weight, and the chandeliers sway for no reason at all. Most of the rooms are booked by truckers, lost tourists, and the occasional couple looking for a cheap getaway. But there's one room no one ever stays in. Room 303. It's been out of order for as long as I've worked here. The manager, Mr. Halverson, is clear about it. Don't rent it. Don't open it. Just let it be. I never asked why. Some things you just let lie. That night, it was just me and the old desk lamp humming with a soft buzz. Rain slapped against the windows, and the lobby clock ticked loud in the silence. The place was empty except for 2 truckers up in 202 and a quiet couple in 109. At 2:17 a.m., I heard it. Music, faint, muffled, a soft melody curling through the halls like cigarette smoke. I stood up, trying to pinpoint the source. The lobby radio was off. The guests were all asleep, and then I realized it was coming from the 3rd floor. I swallowed hard. No one was up there. The sound grew louder as I climbed the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. It was an old tune, something from the 1920s, all smooth brass and soft piano, like a song you'd hear in a dimly lit bar just before last call. When I reached the top, the music was clear, distinct. It was coming from room 303, the out-of-order room. I stared at the door, heart hammering. The brass numbers gleamed dully in the flickering hallway light. I knocked once. Hello. The music stopped. I felt a chill creep on my spine, the kind of cold that settles deep in your bones. I knocked again. Harder. Silence. I fumbled for my master key. My hands were clammy, slick with sweat, but I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open. The room smelled of dust and something faintly sweet, like old perfume. The kind you'd expect on a woman in red lipstick and satin gloves. The bed was made, sheets tucked crisp and tight. A layer of dust covered the furniture, untouched for years. No sign of anyone. No radio. No speakers. But on the nightstand, something flickered. A candle. A freshly lit candle. The flames swayed, casting shadows on the peeling walls. I took a slow step forward, my breath shallow. The air was thick, heavy. It pressed against my chest like an invisible hand. Then, the music started again, right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty room, silent except for my pounding heart. But the door, it was closed. I didn't close it. I bolted. I don't remember running back down the stairs, but I must have because the next thing I knew, I was behind the front desk, gasping for breath. The music had stopped. The hallway upstairs was silent. The next morning, I told Mr. Halverson. He didn't look surprised, didn't ask questions. He just nodded and said, that room belonged to a woman named Eleanor. She checked in on a rainy night in 1928. Never checked out. I quit a week later.